This is Join Us in France, episode 43. Hello, I'm Annie.
And I'm Elise.
And we welcome you to the Join Us in France travel podcast. Elise is a professional tour guide, art historian, and a really good storyteller.
Oh, sometimes too much.
But your voice is back.
My voice is back.
On today's show, we take you to a small medieval village in the southwest of France called Saint-Cirq-Lapopie. How do you say that in English?
So, how do you say that in English? It doesn't exist in English. It's Saint-Cirq-Lapopie, or this is dedicated to my darling mother, who I took there on her first trip to the southwest of France a long time ago. And since she could not pronounce to save herself, she called it Popo. So this is now Saint-Cirq-Popo. To all of those, this is dedicated to my mom out there. Yeah.
So,
Saint-Cirq-Popo.
Yeah, so why would we talk to you about this village? I mean, it's really a village. It's very small.
It's a village. It is for two reasons. One, officially was officially voted in 2012 as France's favorite village.
Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. There's a wonderful program on television. There are actually a whole bunch of programs by somebody named Stephen Bern. Mm-hmm. And he does a lot of things that have to do with history and people. But every year he does one program where they have obviously gone out and chosen pretty villages in different regions of France that they present. I guess these are the finalists. It's kind of like Miss France, except it's Miss France Village, you know. And then they have people vote. They go to the villages. They talk about the heritage of the village, its architecture, its history, what people do who live there today. And in 2012, Saint-Cirq-Lapopie was chosen as France's favorite village.
See, that's a very good reason to talk about it.
And there's another reason, and this is strictly personal, but this is on my very first travels through France a long time ago, and I was basically
in the Middle Ages.
In the Middle Ages, exactly. Yes, that's why we're talking about a village that's from the Middle Ages, because I am now from the Middle Ages. And I was doing what the French call bourlinguing, which means I was basically going left and right, just a little bit as the occasion occurred, and did not know about the existence of this village. And I was actually traveling with a young woman who was American, but that I'd met along the way. And we wound up staying for a night in Cahors, which we'll mention in a couple of minutes. Mm-hmm. And somebody said, you know, if you get a chance, go on, take the road that goes along the Lot River, and you'll see there's this absolutely gorgeous village. And at that time, I had never yet seen a medieval village perched on top of a mountain in my life. And
so it made a big impression.
It made a very big, and it was in October. At the end of October, and so it was gorgeous because the leaves were turning and everything was golden yellow. And we got there, and it was actually not a great day. It was a bit cold and a bit wet, but we got somebody to we took a little train, which no longer exists, unfortunately, and then somebody drove us up to the top of the village, and I went, and that was that. You know? And that was that, you know. It was great. Love at first sight.
That's great. That's great. Okay, we've skipped the music. Are we skipping the music today?
No, go back to the music.
Okay. All right. So let me tell you that you'll find our show notes for this episode and all our episodes on joinusinfrance.com. And on joinusinfrance.com, that's also where you'll find the episodes map, so that if you want to see all the places we've talked about, and we have talked about a lot of places by now. This is our 43rd episode, and maybe by the time you listen to this, we'll have done many, many more. So you'll be able to see on the map what we've talked about. So the other thing you could do on joinusinfrance.com is show us your support by clicking on the tab that says support the show. And of course, there's no obligation to do that. But if you would like to, we really, really appreciate that, because it helps us continue to pay for the expenses that go along with the show.
Absolutely.
You know, which, you know, it's always nice to see.
It's always nice.
People out there care about us. So thank you to those who do that for us. All right, little music to get us in the mood, and we'll get right back to Saint-Cirq-Lapopie. All right, we are back. So, how are you, Elise?
I'm fine.
Yes.
I'm
Are
fine.
you reveling in the memory of Saint-Cirq-Lapopie?
Of Saint-Cirq-Lapopie. I'm reveling in the memory of just having gone away for the weekend and gone to see some things with getting some fall color, even though it's actually quite late. What is it now? We're in the middle of November, but we have had a very strange year in terms of weather. And so it's now just starting to really feel like the time of the year with
Fall.
the leaves changing and things like that. So
Yeah.
it's nice. And
Yeah.
of course, we're so far, we're lucky we haven't had any cold weather.
Not really, no.
Not
Not in
really.
southern France, anyway.
No.
Yeah, it's been very, very nice. So I was just in Saint-Cirq-Lapopie myself
That's right.
for my first time, and I thought it was very, very lovely.
It is very lovely.
We went for the 11th of November, which is a day off here.
Right, Veterans Day.
Yes, and it was quiet, really. There weren't like hordes of people, but it was very, very pleasant. We had
It's very beautiful.
pleasant lunch in a little local restaurant.
The place with the terrace, the open terrace.
I think it is, but we didn't go to the terrace because it was too cold for the
was too
terrace. The
cold.
terrace was cold.
I
It
think
was
there are only
closed.
two places that actually stay open all year.
There were several. There
It is
were
a
maybe
long weekend. That's probably
yeah.
why.
There were like 4 or 5 restaurants that were open. We had a good choice of places, and the food was decent. It was fine.
Yeah.
There was nothing to write home about, but it was good. So there you go.
So maybe what we should do is situate the village first.
Yeah.
So it's in the department of the Lot, L-O-T, which is centrally located in the southwest of France and is north of Toulouse, where we are.
Yeah. It makes for a really nice day trip from
It's
Toulouse.
a gorgeous day trip. It's on the edge of being far because Le Lot as a department is fairly big. And where the Saint-Cirq-Lapopie is actually in the southern part of it. So it goes fairly far north, but it happens to be in a country that I think is gorgeous and has endlessly gorgeous things everywhere. It happens to be one of my favorite regions to go to. And that is partly because I love the architecture in general there, which
It's
is
very
very
beautiful.
different from the architecture here in Toulouse.
Yes.
And also because I happen to favor, although I don't know if I would want to live there all the time, I like the land and the climate of the area because we have, for people who have never been to France, you have the departments, which are administrative areas that are the equivalent of big counties in the States.
Yes.
And then you have regions, which are basically based on the old provinces, right? And then you have geological or geographical regions, and the Lot department and the area we're going to talk about, which is really on the Lot River, is part of an area called Le Quercy.
Yes.
And all of this is...
And that's spelled Quercy.
Right. And all of this is what is called les Causses.
Yes.
And les Causses are actually limestone plateaus that are very interesting because they have a lot of scrub forest and a lot of live oak. In fact, a lot of the truffles come from the area around this here because of the live. But
Lots of short oak trees.
short oak trees, live
Yeah,
oak that you
everywhere.
would see like you can see actually in California, except in California they're much bigger, strangely enough. But it's an area that's basically relatively arid, so you don't have a lot of pasture land, although you have sheep, because sheep will basically eat anything. I mean, they're not fussy
They're
like cows,
easy. Yeah.
They're easy. And it's got these very, very beautiful formations, and it's got endless amounts of limestone cliffs on the rivers. And when you say limestone cliff, you are talking also limestone caves.
Of course.
And so we're not going to talk about it today, but we really should one day do a podcast about the other part of what makes the Lot area interesting from a historical point of view, and that it has some very important caves with prehistoric art in it.
Right.
And so it's an area that has a certain mystery to me. Mm-hmm. And it's also an area that is filled with gorgeous medieval villages. And most of these villages have homes that are vacation homes.
Right.
You know, in other words, there are a few of these places that are actually, I guess you could call towns that have businesses and that function all year long.
Yeah.
But most of this area is an area that is bombarded with tourists and people who own second homes, country homes. A lot of English people, a lot of Parisians. Some Americans are starting to move into this area because it's an area that I guess in a sense you could say was rediscovered in the 20th century. It was an area that was largely abandoned because it was the land there is actually rather poor.
Yeah.
So people went elsewhere.
You drive around to get to Saint-Cirq-Lapopie from Toulouse, you get on the freeway, and then you get off the freeway and you drive around the Parc National du Quercy. Which is, so it's a national park, so it's got a few homes that have been there forever and ever, but otherwise it's pasture land. Well, pasture, yeah. It's a lot of
really pasture land.
Yeah, it's a lot of oak, a few fields where they've cleared the oak,
and therefore the sheep, right?
Yeah, and they have all these nice little fences that are made of piled up limestone. Right. Yeah, so they piled up, and they're really pretty. I mean, they're very uneven and all that, but they're all over along the roads.
Right.
Those are small, narrow roads. You have to go kind of slowly. As a matter of fact, my daughter is doing the driving test, and she was noticing that I was driving below the speed limit.
Yeah.
And that's just because I wasn't in a hurry, and also
it's also gorgeous.
It's beautiful. You want to look around. It's a very sweet kind of
It's
place.
Basically a rural area, and it's an area that
and from Toulouse it takes you probably an hour and 45 minutes from the north of Toulouse where I live.
Right.
Depending on where you are, it might be 2 hours or a little more.
Yeah, I think that's about right. The capital of the Lot department is Cahors, which of course is to understand just how rural this area is, it's the main city, and it has 25,000 people.
Right.
And it's the biggest city in the whole department.
Right.
And it's a administrative city, and it has a small, the equivalent of like 2 years of university there. And then, of course, from there you have to come to Toulouse or go to another major city to finish things. The other city, which is on the other side of the Lot, which is further east, is Figeac, which is the sous-préfecture.
Yep.
And that's only like 12 or 13,000 people.
Yes.
So it's a region that historically has wonderful stories to tell, because it was a region that was fought over for several hundred years by the French and the English during the 100 Years' War.
Surprise!
And before that and after that, because it is, if you take a look at the map, you will see that to the west of it, you have the region called Dordogne.
Yeah. And
to the south, you have Tarn-et-Garonne and Aveyron, which are really part of the region closer to Toulouse, even though they're again also relatively rural. And to the north, an area that people go to, again, largely just for wandering and seeing the gorgeous landscape, and that is the Corrèze.
Yeah.
But
that's even more rural.
It's even more rural and has basically almost no cities of any kind except for Tulle, which is one. But what's interesting about the Lot is that it also, in spite of, or maybe because obviously I'm not a geologist, the fact that it's the coast and it has all of these limestone cliffs, it also is crisscrossed with wonderful tiny little rivers.
Yeah.
And of course the main river, which is what gave the name of the department, is the Lot. And in the Middle Ages, it was not L-O-T as in it is now. It was L''O-T.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
And there are actually, because it was the ut.
I see.
And it was in Occitan, it was the ut. And I guess for people out there to remember, this is a region, the southwest of France, that was Occitan speaking for centuries and centuries. And so there are still actually a few villages and places where the name is L''OT. And then I guess by usage or whatever, at some point they stopped using the apostrophe. Instead of saying L''OT, it just became lot.
Yeah,
It just became lot.
Okay.
So
and do you know what the OT, what it means?
No, I don't. And I don't know if
I don't speak Occitan, so I don't know.
I really don't know if it had a meaning, except that it was the name of the river. And as we know that in most departments, it's a geographical feature that gives the name to the department.
Sure.
So who knows how far back the name goes? I mean, it could be back to the Gauls, as far as I know, that they said, oh, this is the Ott River. I was like, have no clue.
Who knows?
But it went from L''OT to the lot, and it is famous for its beautiful villages, and it really is. If you take a look at a map, a tourist map that indicates where you have castles and medieval villages, it is one of the departments in France that has the most.
It has a lot.
It has the most. And one of the things that I love about the area, and this is specifically true, of course, in Saint-Cirq-Lapopie, is that there's a region where everything is built of stone. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you have the limestone everywhere. It's a very beautiful limestone. It's a very creamy, yellowy kind of limestone.
Yeah.
It's not this white.
And it ages to a gray.
Yeah,
with
to this gray.
With things that grow on it.
Right.
And so you have like moss and things like that.
Yeah, and for some reason, I don't know why I find this so beautiful, but it's a region, nearby areas also, but specifically in this area, where the houses have very steep, perched, peaked roofs.
Yes, the pitch on the roof is
and the pitch is very high, and they're made with this very dark red-brown tile.
And it's
gorgeous,
flat.
and they're flat tiles.
It's not like because in Toulouse we get
the Roman tile.
Yeah, Roman tile. So they're like
the tunnel
rounded.
tile, right.
Yeah, they look like the tunnel.
Right.
But over there it's all flat.
It's flat.
And I don't know how they're held together, but those roofs, I'll put pictures on the website.
They're gorgeous.
The roofs are just amazing.
They're amazing, and there's a groove in them. There's a groove on each side, so it's basically a groove and then flat and then a groove, and then they seem to hook on. They hook onto each other and they overlap, and that apparently is the basic way they keep them. But the roofs are really, really, really steeped, and the color of them seems to go so well with the green of the landscape and the kind of creamy color of the stone. It's just, I find it absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, it's very, very beautiful.
It's very beautiful.
And because there's vegetation, small patches of vegetation that grows on the stone, both on the stone and the roof.
Yeah.
So some of these moss and whatever grasses they turn color too.
Yeah.
So it's really very, very pretty.
It's very pretty, and the whole region. This is the typical traditional architecture of the region.
Right, and I didn't see a single modern-looking home
Not
in the
Saint-Cirq.
village.
No,
Yeah.
in Saint-Cirq there isn't, because it's actually the village entirely is a historical monument.
Okay.
So I don't know if you noticed, but down below as you drive along, and I just want to mention the way you can actually arrive there, but outside the village, along the river, and up above in the hills, far from the village, you do have modern houses.
Of course,
People have bought pieces of land and built them.
Yeah.
But just to try to situate it, as you said, it's that far from Toulouse, which is of course where we would be going from. The main town is Cahors, which is on a route that is what is called a national, which is the old route that would take you straight from Toulouse all the way up to Paris, which of course is now used for. Part of it is what is now an autoroute that is free, so you can do that. But what you do is you get off at Cahors. There's another way of going, but there are actually two other ways of going that are far more complicated. Yeah. But it's about 30 kilometers east of Cahors on the Lot River. And I assume that's how you went. So
no,
you didn't. Oh, because the other way of going is by going up on the upper side, coming up from the Caussade. And if you come from Caussade, you wind up on the village of Saint-Cirq-Lapopie is on the southern bank of the Lot River, which basically with meanders runs east-west.
Mm-hmm.
And it's perched up, of course, 150 meters up high on top of this huge promontory, this rock.
Yeah.
So you have access to the village by either going from Cahors and going on the road that runs along the river, which is the bottom road, which is pretty much almost flush with the river, but passes through endless, gorgeous little medieval towns.
Yeah.
And also, as you drive along, for people who are nervous and who've never done narrow, windy road driving, you have to be really careful because the road can be really narrow at times.
Yeah.
And part of the road is actually blasted out of the rock.
Uh-huh.
So you have these huge overhangs of cliff above you. And I've actually done this endless times, both in a car and then in a big tourist bus.
Uh-huh.
And when you arrive with the tourist bus, everybody in the bus gasps because they are sure that the bus is just going to go right into the top of, the top of the bus is going to go right into the cliff. They cannot believe it. And of course, if you're in a little French car coming the other way, you better stop and get out of the way because there's no way that the bus and the tiny little car are going to go through these little passes together. You have to, you really have to take it easy. But what happens is if you do follow that road, as you arrive, you start to see more and more of these cliffs that are on the south side in this part of the drive, because further up the lot, you actually have the cliffs also on the north side. And so it's a spectacular view because the valley is flat, but not very big. So you feel like you almost have access to touching the cliffs as you drive along. And there are 2 or 3 beautiful little medieval villages that you drive through. Again, all of this on this very narrow road. And then eventually you see that the river widens a bit because there are places where you have campgrounds where you can actually go kayaking on the river. Mm-hmm. And then eventually you will see, besides signs that indicate other villages that are up left and right, up in the hills and some castles, you will eventually see a sign saying Saint-Cirq-Lapopie. Mm-hmm. And that, of course, is where you would turn right, go on a bridge across the river. Yeah. And you start your ascent towards the top of the village. Yeah. You can actually park a car down below if you're adventurous and walk up, but you have to be, if you've been there before, you know that you're much better off driving all the way up to the top into the parking area, which is all the way above the village, and then working your way down through the village itself. Now, you can arrive at Saint-Cirq-Lapopie coming straight up through the central area south of Saint-Cirq-Lapopie, and not from Cahors. You have to meander through a bunch of small towns, not tiny villages. But what happens then is that you arrive up on top.
That's what we did.
That's what you did. Okay.
So we did. Because what we did is we left
You went there
late.
first.
Exactly.
Okay.
We went to Saint-Cirq-Lapopie first because we wanted to have lunch there.
Okay.
And so we arrived from the top down. And
so
we parked at the top. You pay like €3 or €4 or whatever it was for the day. And then you have a short walk down. But the short walk down is on the road.
Yes.
There is no sidewalk.
No, there's no sidewalk.
So you have to be...
Yeah, you have to be careful.
A little bit careful.
And then you, of course, enter into the village. Now, if you come that way, of course, you come up through a town called Caussade, and you go through these little narrow valleys and a little bit of gorge area. But if you come from Cahors, one of the things that you can do before you get there, or you can actually go and park your car in Saint-Cirq-Lapopie and then do this and do a round trip. There's a small town that's just about a mile before you get to Saint-Cirq-Lapopie, coming from the west, that is coming along the bottom road along the river. And it's also a little town that's on the other side of the river. It's called Bouziès.
Bouziès.
Bouzie, accent grave S.
Okay.
Bouziès. And it's very charming. It's very small. It's nothing like Saint-Cirq-Lapopie, which is a sizable village. And it's down below along the riverbank. Mm-hmm. But what you have there, and I've done a couple of times, and it is really fun to do, unless it's a super rainy, muddy day, then you don't want to do this. There's something called the Chemin de Halage, which is a path, a footpath, that you go out first into some fields, and then you wind up along the bank of the river on the same side as Saint-Cirq-Lapopie, that is on the south side. And it's a path that is just about, I'd say, maybe a mile or a little less than a mile, that also includes a section that's cut into the cliff. And it's beautiful because you walk along it and you're right next to the river, and you have the overhang of the rocks and you have the trees. And it was made because in the Middle Ages, the river, the Lot River, like a lot of the other rivers, was used for transportation.
Right.
And the transportation in the old days, we're talking the 1000s, 1100s, 1200s, before they had motors, it was flat-bottomed boats that were pulled by horses or by men.
Wow.
They had harnesses on them. And so the chemin de halage was actually created for them to pull these boats.
Yeah, aller means to pull.
To pull. And so it was...
It's an old word.
It's an old word, and it's actually... What they did was, in the 20th century, in the second half of the 20th century, when this region, which had really been abandoned by most people, started becoming a region for people to go to for vacation, for summer homes and things like that, they opened up this chemin de halage again, so that they fixed it up so that it would be easy for people to walk along, and it wasn't just for the people that were still pulling things along the way, because there's actually two passages where they created, I guess what you would call I don't know if you would really consider it like a canal, but they diverted the waters and made it kind of narrow, protected passage so that things can be, these are really small boats anyway, you know, so that they could be pulled through. Imagine a person with a horse, but imagine if this is one or two people with these harnesses on their shoulders pulling these things. So now, of course, it's something that people do just for the pleasure of it, obviously, not pulling a horse or pulling a boat. And when you get done, if you start at Bouziès, you wind up at the bottom of Saint-Cirq-Lapopie.
Yeah.
And you can work your way up either by going out to the road that takes the cars up, or there's a series of steps.
Right.
That you can work your way up to the top from.
Right. So what we did is, you had told me about this, but we were in a hurry because we also wanted to see Cahors on the same day, and we left kind of late and da-da-da. So, but I think I would recommend going from the bottom, like you did. Go via
go to Cahors first.
Go to Cahors first.
Right.
Then you can't. I mean, there's no other way. From Cahors, you will end up on that road.
You have to go on that road.
Right. And you'll go through Bouziès and all of that.
Right.
I think that's probably a prettier way. And I might just have to go again.
You might just have to go again.
We're not that far away. So on a nice sunny day, if I have the time,
wonderful,
I might do that.
Right?
Yeah.
Because if you go along the river, starting in Cahors, you actually have this approach where you see it from a distance, and you go around a couple of bends in the river, and then unbelievable, lo and behold, I mean, this is really it's really spectacular. Now, France has lots of medieval villages that are gorgeous in many regions, and it has lots of villages that are up on top of hills, and there are others that are really beautiful, but there is something so unbelievably spectacular about this one. And one of the things is, I think, is that it's not just all built at the same level up above. It starts down below, close to the banks of the river, and it works its way up. And
lots of tiers, lots of different levels.
And so let's the village itself. Okay, Saint-Cirq-Lapopie, named after a saint whose name apparently in Occitan was Circ, C-I-R-C. I have no idea what that might have been in Latin. I mean, it's, there are different saints. I've never really heard of most of them, but there are lots of them.
Shame on you, Elise.
Shame on me,
oh,
right?
Jeez.
But the story of Saint-Cirq-Lapopie is actually really fascinating because it was mentioned first about 1,000 years ago.
Wow.
And it belonged to the seigneur, the Baron of Cardiac.
Cardiac.
Yeah. Now this is like Cadillac. If you take the Cadillac and Cadillac, which is if you take the spelling of the car in English, Cadillac, And just to add an R,
Uh-huh.
cardiac. But of course, the
Yeah.
French spelling, the French pronunciation is cardiac.
Yeah.
And the Lords of Cardiac, which is a huge, magnificent castle that you can see further up the Lot River. If you continue after going to Saint-Cirq-Lapopie, you get to see 2 or 3 incredible castles and things. Personally, I think you can do 3 days in this area and never see everything and never see every village and thing.
Yeah, I think there's more to see than you realize, because we were trying to do it fast and
Right.
we probably just skipped right by things that we should have stopped at.
I mean, you can, some people overdose on medieval village and castle, I mean, you have
Well.
to, but it is gorgeous. Anyway, so they were given this land by the old counts of Toulouse. This is, we're talking feudal times, obviously,
Yeah.
and they are the first ones to have taken this area. Now, you'd think to yourself, you and I have seen this. Why would anybody want this? I mean, you can't grow any. I mean, it's so steep. It's
Yeah.
so unbelievably, spectacularly steep.
Yeah.
Well, of course, the reason they wanted it was for defensive purposes, because
I could see
from
why.
up above, where the ruins of the castle still are, where you have that point of view where you
Yeah,
look out
the
over the
circular
river,
thing,
that's
yeah.
where the castle was. You
Oh.
can see.
That was a mighty small castle.
Well, do you remember where the church is?
Yes.
If you think that
Very small church,
the,
too.
the church, but it was, remember the size of the village that you're
true,
in.
that's
Okay?
true.
The church is the church that from the side of the church all the way to the upper part of the point of view was
Yeah.
where the original castle was.
Yeah.
So it probably wasn't that small actually, but in the 1100s,
okay.
in the 1100s, castles were built for strictly defensive. A fortified castle was defensive.
So you're saying that the church, where the church is and where that circular promontory is, that
All
between the two of them
was the whole-
was
yeah.
a castle.
Was a
Okay.
castle,
Yeah,
okay.
then it's not that small.
It's not that small.
Yeah.
It was it was cantilevered.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
it's on several levels.
It must have been very complicated to build again, but it was up there. And the reason it was up there was because you have the view of everything coming from the direction of Cahors, coming
Yeah.
from west. And I think if you go further, there's a little point of view where you can also see a little bit from the east, but they were more concerned from the west. Why? Because they were French. They were these are all the barons and the feudal servitude of the French, the Counts of Toulouse, and then the King of France eventually. And what was on the west? Well, the west was Aquitaine, and that was English.
Oh, jeez.
And
yeah, you don't dumb.
You don't want them coming to take your castle and your village. And in fact, what's fascinating to know is that in the Lot area, and then in Dordogne, which is the department in the region directly west, which is where the Lot River actually goes through the Dordogne and meets up with the Dordogne River and all of that. But these two departments have the highest concentration of castles of any area of France.
Wow.
Because of the 100 Years' War plus between the English and the French.
Yeah.
So that every time a lord from either that was loyal to the English king, which is the people that were Aquitaine people, right?
Mm-hmm.
They weren't English. They were French people who spoke Occitan, but they were loyal to the English king.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They would build a castle on one side of the river on top of some rock.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, that was always to make sure they could see what was happening. And if they did, then the French lord
Would do the same
would
thing.
do the same thing
On the other side.
On the other side.
Yeah,
So
okay.
so what you have is, and it's hilarious, but
Tit
it's
for
also
tat.
it's great for tourism. I mean, it really is.
That's what they were thinking
That's
about.
what they were thinking
I'm
about
sure.
800-900 years ago.
I'm sure.
I mean, so you
Planned
have
it all out. The crafty
this is
people.
it. You said English tower and fortified castle, French tower, fortified castle, church down below where we're going to put the snack. I mean, really. So I remember reading this once, and when I was doing my preparation for one of my guide exams, and I thought that was hilarious. But obviously, I mean, we have the benefit of that today because you can run
Of
around.
course.
Now, the reality is that you and I and most people would not know whether the castle we were looking at was a castle
French
that
or
was
English.
French or English, because they looked exactly the same.
And it might have changed sides anyway.
And they did often change sides.
Yeah, yeah.
And they did. However, the castle and Saint-Cirq-Lapopie never changed sides.
Ooh.
Never. What did happen, though, was that starting in the 60s or 1270s, which is still, of course, a long time ago, the land and the village itself, which at the time was very important because not only was it in a strategic spot for looking to see what was coming up the river, but because in those days, people didn't live in scattered areas, obviously. Everybody gathered together around the castle of the Lord because in case there was any problem, the Lord's responsibility was to open the gates and protect everybody.
Yeah.
So, of course, you have a lot of craftspeople and in that time along the river, you had a lot of people who worked metal.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were people who were... I guess the forgerons, who did things with iron.
Forgeron. How do you say that in English?
Blacksmith.
A blacksmith. Yes.
But not just for horses, but, just whatever irons things that needed to be. And then you had a lot of tanning of hides.
Mm-hmm.
And so the various crafts corporations, they existed there already.
Mm-hmm.
And probably because it was strategically located and because there was this saint, Saint-Cirq, who had apparently... blessed this area.
I see.
There was another lord who wanted to take over Saint-Cirq-Lapopie.
Okay.
And what happened was there was this huge fight between the barons of Cardiac and these other lords, and you'll have to forgive me, but I don't remember their names. And so what happened was that at some point they were actually fighting over who owned the village and who would build their castle. And so these other lords built a second castle, which you no longer can see, but up on the top where you have that point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So they were actually like back to back.
Wow.
And the Counts of Toulouse did one of these Solomon numbers and decided that the only way to deal with this kind of a problem was to have them share the village.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
That's going to be easy for the people living there, isn't it?
Well, I don't know what difference, it would be interesting to do some research to find out how that affected the local people. I mean, if you're working as a smithy or you're working tanning or working as a weaver,
that's true.
You probably have to pay whatever taxes and whatever you pay. But maybe you had to pay double because there were two lords. Maybe. I don't know. But
maybe
they weren't
split
happy.
The commission.
They split the commission. They probably did. But you won't believe this. There was a third.
Oh, geez. You don't need three lords.
You don't need
three lords.
You don't. One is bad enough, right?
Yeah, no, I don't. I definitely wouldn't want three.
It went down in history as one of these villages where in order to make sure that they didn't fight with each other, because each of these families had outlying land.
Mm-hmm.
So the Cardiacs were a little bit to the east, and there was one other lord that was a little bit to the north, and the other one was a little bit to the west. And so they all fought over who had dominion over Saint-Cirq-Lapopie because it was a strategically important place. And for a certain amount of time, but it didn't last that long, they actually had three lords who had to get together. They had a council. They would get together in the huge reception areas that always existed in these fortified castles.
Uh-huh.
And they would have to make decisions as a triumvirate.
Wow.
And they did.
As a what?
Triumvirate.
Never heard of that.
Oh, well, like the triumvirate in Rome, the three people who ran Rome.
Jeez, you're using big words.
It's a triumvirate. Tri as in three.
Right, try I get, but triumvirate.
Triumvirate.
I have no idea how you spell that. I'm going to have to look it up.
You'll have to look it up.
I will look it up, yeah.
So
another new word. Not one that's going to be useful, though.
Triumvirate. Oh, yeah. It will.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I believe you.
Yeah. And what happened was, ironically, that because there were three lords who were basically running the village became very rich.
No. How do you become rich when you pay all these lords?
Because each of the lords brought in some of its own craftspeople to work in the village, and the village, of course, which today is.
So this is like 1400s.
This is the 1200s and 1300s.
Oh wow!
Right, so it's a while ago, right?
Yeah.
But this is the time when all of the big medieval villages that are still standing were mostly built.
Okay,
and so of course, what did that do? Well, this is a village, and of course, I know you're going to show the photos of it.
Yeah,
it starts up on the top of this promontory. And little by little, they built all of these houses that went all the way down to the riverbanks. And so it became this huge village. And apparently, at the height of its rich times, of it, when it was really prosperous, it was bigger than the village you see today. And it's a good sized village.
Yes.
If you walk through it, considering what life was like in the Middle Ages, in those days, it's a long time ago, it was really a prosperous, important village on the lot, because not only did they have all that, but they traded with the goods going back and forth, and they had people pay them customs dues. This is the big thing about being a feudal lord. You can pretty much do what you want to do. As long as you give the lord above you their commission
Their
on
cut,
it,
yeah.
you can do what you want.
Yeah.
So as the boats are going back and forth with all these goods, because they grew all kinds of things there, and it was a very important region for all of this tanning of hides, for the metal work, for certain kinds of textiles.
There's wine too. I mean, Cahors is well known for wine. It's not that far.
But not on the lot, actually.
Well, sure, yeah.
Yeah, it's a little further. But what they did have, believe it or not, was a form of tobacco.
Oh?
Because there is still tobacco grown along the banks of the Lot River. And it's not just tobacco that was brought back from the Americas, because they have what they call brown tobacco, which is a kind of tobacco that apparently came originally from Turkey or someplace like that, and was brought back in the days of Marco Polo. So we're talking the 1200s. And so this area, actually to this day, you can drive around and see fields of tobacco, and it's really interesting. So they took the commerce on the river, and it helped make this town, Saint-Cirq-Lapopie, really, really wealthy. And it stayed wealthy for a long time. And then, of course, we're talking several hundred years. It became affluent, which is why you have all these gorgeous houses with beautiful details on the windows and on the doors. You have Middle-aged houses doors from the Renaissance. You have the church. And then, starting in the 1500s, life went elsewhere. Let's put it that way. I mean, starting in the 16th century, these areas they still had lords, but big cities developed. And that's when Cahors became much more important, because of being more of a city, and the other small cities in the area.
To build in
it's
Cahors,
much easier to build.
Yeah.
And of course, once you get into the end of the 1500s, beginning of the 1600s, we finally get a period of relative peace, where you don't have to worry too much about building defensive fortified castles on the top of these huge promontory rocks. And so life pretty much goes into a kind of, what would we call a semi-comatose situation in Saint-Cirq-Lapopie. And it stays a village where people live. But basically, when you go up into the 1700s and 1800s, these are areas that are known because they have important families that are lords that wind up sending somebody in their family up to Versailles or up to Paris or whatever. But these are the lords of the countryside, basically.
Yeah.
And this is what happens to Saint-Cirq-Lapopie. It's off all the beaten track. You get to the period of time where we're starting to have modern life. So you have electricity, and you have trains. There's nothing around there. Nothing,
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have a road to cut through to get there. You have sheep grazing up above that they take for the wool. And
it's not easily accessible.
It's not very accessible.
For most, unless you have a car.
And in the beginning of the 20th century, it probably would have died out completely, except that a couple of the very famous surrealist artists discovered this village, which probably had 3/4 of its houses in very bad repair. And they decided that it would be a wonderful place to make an artist colony.
Oh, okay.
And so starting in the summertime, a whole group of artists and writers would go to Saint-Cirq-Lapopie, and they created a world of artist colony in Saint-Cirq-Lapopie, and that is what brought it back to life. And so even prior to World War II, it was a place that artists and writers would go. And in fact, I have to look up to remind myself who, but there was a famous artist who was hiding from the Germans, who was given refuge there in the village and hidden away in one of these houses all through the war and saved that way during World War II.
So if you find it, let me know. I'll put it in the show notes.
I'm missing a couple of names, but I will give them to you. And then what happened was it brought it back to life in a sense, and it put the name of the town back on the map because of the heroism of the people and because it was famous for having these writers and artists. And it brought back more craftspeople, so that by the time you get to post-World War II and starting in the 1960s, there are 2 or 3 artists who buy houses there, who live there all year round. And when I first saw it, which was in the 1980s, so it's already a long time ago, it was my very first trip going through all of this area. It was in the end of the 1980s. It was a place that had a lot of artists and a lot of craftspeople. There are not as many now, because now a lot of the store, it's been turned into shops, which is fine too.
Yeah.
They have a little wine shop where they give tastings of all the wines of Cahors and the Malbecs and all of that.
They call it a musée du vin.
They call it Musée du Vin, but it actually the people who run it they're very charming, you know. But there are still craftspeople who do leather work, jewelry work, and of course there are lots of B&Bs. There's 2 or 3 little restaurant hotels, and a lot of the houses were bought up by people to turn into summer homes.
Yeah.
And then little by little it came to be famous again as being absolutely beautiful. And of course,
which it always was. I mean, that is just...
It's absolutely gorgeous.
For sure, yeah.
It's absolutely gorgeous. And in the 1990s, it was declared as the entire village was declared a historical monument. And I believe it's on the list of things to become a UNESCO World Heritage Site as a village. That's how important it is. And the style of the houses is incredible because they're all from the 1200s and 1300s and 1400s.
Yeah, you will not see anything... most French villages, even the really pretty ones, well, somebody did some renovation and put some sort of, electrical shutters or something like that that completely is out of place. But there, nothing is out of place. I don't know what they do, like if they have a damage to the roof or something, where do they go to buy roof tiles like that?
Those kinds of tiles are still produced.
Oh, okay.
But the big problem is, and this is of course the problem always with anything that's a historical monument, is that if it's the old style of material and the old style of building, they have to get a compagnon. They have to get someone who belongs to one of these guilds to work on the doorway or the house or the roof. It's got to be expensive. It's very expensive, which is why it's a wealthy town.
More expensive than usual, which France is already quite expensive.
Right, and this is why the people who own most of the houses, unless there are some that are made into gîtes, which means, of course, that they're rented out by the week to tourists, and that, of course, exists as well. But most of the owners are relatively wealthy people because it costs a lot of money to maintain the upkeep of houses that are historical buildings like this, because you have to use those materials. You can't use any modern materials whatsoever.
You wouldn't want to. It would completely be out of place anyway. And they've done a superb job of that in that particular village.
It really is a spectacularly gorgeous village. I mean, there really are, honestly, lots of beautiful villages in France. And there are certain regions in the southwest and in Provence that have villages perched up on top of hills that are gorgeous. But as you say, there are very few that are this homogeneous in keeping the gorgeous medieval style of the architecture. And they're just spectacular. And it's very steep. Walking up and down is relatively steep. Inside the village, I think there's one little road that people who live in the village can actually use to have cars access their houses.
Well, around this time of year, you could still drive through that road, but you can stop anywhere. Right. Well, I did stop somewhere to take a picture, but you're not supposed to.
You're not supposed to.
There are a few places where they have like a garage that's like in a hole in the cliff. Right. They just put a garage door in front of an old garage door, obviously. So, but you can't really. I mean, you could. I guess if you had problems with mobility issues, you could like drop them off
Probably.
on that road and then go park somewhere else.
But it's not. It's not.
But it would be easy because I mean it's cobblestone and it's old
and it's up and down.
Yeah, it's up and down a lot.
And of course it's still it is now.
But I mean, you can take it slow. You don't have to run through it.
No, I've seen people who. Who walk with these walking canes, just as a way of making sure that there's a certain stability in it.
Yeah.
Now, there's only one, what I would call bémol to the whole story of Saint-Cirq-Lapopie, and it's like Carcassonne, and that is that there are certain times of the summer when there are hordes. Hordes. There are big buses now. It never used to be like that. It never was.
And I think they're building a new parking lot for buses.
Oh, really?
Up above the village.
Yeah.
Because as we were entering the village, we're maybe a kilometer away from the entrance of the village. But we didn't know it yet, but that's where we were. I saw a big construction that looked like it's going to be one of those thing where buses can park diagonal, parallel to one another on the diagonal.
Yeah, 15 years ago. And now I'm going to sound like one of these old crotchets, 15 years ago, it was not quite like that. It was still, it was already popular, but now you have busloads with hordes that come in July and part of August.
Again, we were there on November 11th, and it was pretty low key. We were able to park. I mean, of course, we had to pay the $3 to park, but it wasn't a big deal. Yeah, it was not hordes of tourists. Around lunchtime, the restaurants that were open all filled in.
Right. Well, that is now.
So
what
don't
happens
wait
is
too long.
No,
okay?
but the best times to go, of course, are May, June, September, and October because everything is still open.
Yeah.
All the shops are still open until just about mid-October, and then some of them start to close. But
there were a lot of shops that were closed.
Yeah. But what happens is that it's a town or a village that will have few places that stay open for weekends all year, and they are not open during the week. So it's a great place for people who are from Toulouse, from the cities that are not too far away,
or Montauban,
right?
even.
Exactly, or even people I think from Brive, or from even if you come from Bordeaux and you want to do a day or a weekend in the lot, there are lots of people who live in the Southwest who will go there on weekends during the year, off season, and there you will have some restaurants open and a few of the things like the Museum of Wine and a couple of this shop that makes gorgeous leather bags. I mean, there are some really nice things open, but a lot of the other things are closed, and definitely during the week closed. So now when I first went there, again a long time ago, unfortunately, there was the little train. There was a teeny train, a tourist train that went from Cahors that followed along the Lot Valley, and you could get off down below and then just walk all the way up to the top. Now, unfortunately, that train does not exist anymore.
Wasn't a city train. I mean, it was a
tourist train that went through the valley.
Yeah.
And it went all the way to the other end. And, of course, if you go there and you have enough time, there are other little villages and castles to visit that are close by. There is so much to see that you actually have to make a choice. I mean, there's just that much in the area. But if you go to this area and want to just do one day, like what you did, I think you do Saint-Cirq-Lapopie and then Cahors. And if you have the time, if you do it the other way, if you go to Cahors first, especially if you go on a Saturday, that's when the big market is on in Cahors, and then you work your way there, and then you can sort of work your way out from there. But there are lots of things to see in this area, but nothing is quite so beautiful in its
And I noticed
form.
that the Saint-Cirq-Lapopie, they have a website where they suggest several hikes. So some of them, so people who want to walk can do, like they suggest walks that will take 3 or 4 hours, where you go through the river and you go
up above. I think on the coast a little bit. No, don't they do one like that?
Maybe there is one. I didn't
know.
look at all of them in detail, but there are many ways that you can visit the area. I think it's worth a full day, Saint-Cirq-Lapopie, if you can spare it,
and then do some other outdoor activity at the same time.
Right. So you will do some
The shaman will
right,
do the
some
boat.
hiking. I know in the summer that they have all these boats that you can take that will take you on the Lot River.
That's right.
But it's only in the summer.
Only in the summer.
Right.
You can kayak there too.
Yes.
In the summer. And just in fact down below at the very bottom of the village along the river, there's a huge campground. There are lots of people who do that, and they go kayaking, and they take these other flat bottom boats, and you can do a lot of things. The only thing that I think you have to be really a superhuman being to do is try and go up to the top on a bicycle.
I'm sure lots of people do that.
You think they do? Huh?
I'm sure lots of people do that, but it is steep and windy, and it would probably give you a workout. But lots of people want to do that. So,
but Saint-Cirq-Lapopie, boy, it's really it's a trip. It's just gorgeous.
Yeah, I think if you're in the southwest of France, you definitely want to make a stop there. It would be a shame not to see it while you're in the southwest. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Let's go.
It's a nice day.
I gotta go again. Yeah, it is a nice day today. I have to go again because I didn't see all the bottom stuff very much.
Oh, and do the walk. It's really a nice
Le
little...
chemin de halage.
Yeah, the chemin de halage.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun.
Okay.
As long as it's not muddy.
Well, knowing me, it probably would be. I always go on terrible days.
Okay, well, we'll be coming back to the lot area again.
Yes.
There's
And
more to talk about.
We'll podcast about different areas around there. There's lots to see around there. Okay. All right. I think we're done, my friend.
Okay.
I want to thank the listeners for putting up with us and our terrible humor.
Very bad. Listen to her laugh.
And we would love it if you would share the show with your friends. Tell them about us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Pinterest. Whatever social network you like to use, you have the share buttons at the bottom of every post. And since you are our only advertising budget, we really appreciate any effort you can make in that direction because,
And Christmas is coming up. Think of us in terms of what you do with Amazon purchases.
Yeah, Amazon.com what you do is you go to joinusinfrance.com/Amazon. And if you click there first, we get a small commission from your purchases. Anything you purchase, it doesn't matter what you buy. And it's good because, then the show is self-sustaining, self-supporting, which is always a very good thing. That's it, my friend. Thank you. We will talk to you next week.
See you next week.
All right. Au revoir.
Au revoir.